Good evening. Hi. Welcome. Welcome to CitySpace. Hello to our virtual audiences as well. And welcome especially to our in-person audiences. My name is Stephen Davey. I'm the senior producer here at WBUR CitySpace. Welcome. We have a special night for you tonight, the second part of our mini-series on longevity. And it's in partnership with On Point. We're calling it Remarkable Science, and you'll know why in just a few minutes. The name is on purpose because tonight we'll be digging into some cutting-edge and provocative science and ideas. That aging doesn't have to be something that just happens. What if aging were something thought of instead as something you could treat? That aging might just be reversible. How about starting a new career at 80? How about living past 100? On the table tonight, people. Tonight we're going to be talking with Harvard researcher and biotech founder, Dr. David Sinclair. He's one of the foremost thinkers on human longevity, a professor at Harvard's genetics department, and co-director of the Paul Glenn Center for Biology of Aging Research at Harvard Medical School. His New York Times best-selling book is called Lifespan: Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. Our partners at Brookline Booksmith have copies out in the lobby, as you saw. Hint, hint, the holidays are approaching, and David will be signing copies after the conversation. Helping us explore the remarkable science tonight is On Point host Meghna Chakrabarti. And we want to hear your questions. Head to sly.do and enter science. And if you entered the contest at the beginning, you know where that's at. Once again, sly.do and enter science. We'll get to as many questions as we can. Now, please put your hands together for Meghna and Dr. David Sinclair.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, just join me again in welcoming Dr. Sinclair to the stage. Thank you very much for coming out on yet another chilly winter night here for us. So, Dr. Sinclair, I thought I might start with something that one probably shouldn't do in polite company.
Okay, what is that?
I'm going to poll the audience. How old do you think David Sinclair is? 29. 52. 45. 48. 120. You win. Now, of course, people's looks can be very misleading in terms of age. So maybe a better way to put it, and I'll turn it back to you, Dr. Sinclair. The audience is actually at a disadvantage because they have to make this judgment just based on what they see. But biologically, age is a different thing. So how old would you say you are biologically?
Well, I don't say how old I am, but I do use a number of different tests to see how I'm doing. And I do that as a role model because I think we cannot optimize what we don't measure. So I've been measuring myself for over the last 15 years to see what works in lifestyle and other things that I do as a scientist and hopefully a role model for the future. So the tests indicate across the board that I'm about a decade younger biologically than I am chronologically. I certainly feel younger, and my partner would say I act younger, often to my own detriment, but it's very possible to be younger than your actual birthday candles would suggest. There is a Harvard study that shows that if you do just the right things that we might talk about later, you can expect to live, on average, another 14 years than if you did not do those things. So I try to do all the good things as a role model and hopefully help inspire others to do the same.
Yeah. So in the interest of transparency and what I would do in our regular show, I would say, renowned scientist Dr. David Sinclair, 53, is here joining us today. So there you go. I'm 47, by the way. I will just put it out there just to show everyone. I will expose myself to the same amount of transparency. But in whatever you think your lifetime might be, how much do you think average human longevity might change in that time?
Well, it's changing every day. In fact, every year you stay alive, you get another 3 months of life because technology is advancing. And it's been going up across the world in advanced nations continuously over the last 200 years. And there's no sign that it's slowing down. If anything, it's going to speed up. And so I think that there is a chance that the first person to live to 150 is already with us on the planet. And not only that, even if technology doesn't go exponential, which I think it's about to, even with today's march of science, someone born today has a 50-50 chance of getting to 100, as opposed to right now, someone who's 100 has made it through, about 98% of people of that age have died already. So Queen Elizabeth, she was really lucky. In the future, it'll be normal to reach her age.
Now, when you say someone born today, it's highly dependent on born where, right? I mean, I don't imagine a Yemeni child born today has a likelihood of living to being 100, a 50-50 chance.
Right. So the good news, though, is that the world is increasingly getting enough nutrition to be able to do well, and diseases, overall infectious diseases, are coming down. And in the future, more and more people will have access to healthcare. But you're right. The problem right now is that there are technologies and knowledge and lifestyles that we know keep you younger and healthier. They're just unevenly distributed, even within this country.
Right. So you said we might sort of be at in a sense, a tipping point in terms of the acceleration of longevity. I'm going to just keep that as tease for folks right now, because before we go forward, I actually wanted to go backward a little bit and ask you sort of to tell us the story briefly, if you could, about when your curiosity, your passion, I mean, what's become your life work in terms of human aging. When did that first begin?
Well, my interest in aging began when everybody's interest starts, when you realize that your parents are mortals and will die one day. That's a really sad day. We all have experienced that. We all know about death. And usually it happens around the age of 4 or 5 that we realize that this is true. For me, I was raised in part by my grandmother. My mother worked, so my grandmother did take care of me. And she was the sort of person that liked to shock people. And she shocked me when I was 4 years old. She said, well, I asked her the question, I called her Vera, not grandmother. Vera, will you always be around? And of course, I'm thinking, say yes, because I can't live without you. And she said, no, I'm going to die. We're all going to die. Your cat's going to die first, then your parents are going to die, then you'll die. So that was traumatic. I remember exactly where I was when it happened, what the carpet felt like. It was prickly 1970s carpet. And for most of us, we do experience something that traumatic. I witnessed it in my children. I have 3 kids, and the oldest cried for a week at night when I told her the same thing. Unfortunately, we all go through that, but most of us can forget about it because it's traumatic. We don't think about death every day. It's quite depressing, but I couldn't forget about it. It stayed with me because largely I felt like it was unfair. Why would there be a conscious species that knew it was going to die? That just doesn't seem right to me. And I knew that people were working on diseases, cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's. This is what I always wanted to do. I wanted to grow up and be a doctor. But why would we ignore aging? Aging is the worst that can happen to us. So that's how I became hooked.
Can we put up we've got a picture of Vera, of your grandmother. And I just want to read a quick passage from your book Lifespan, if you could, about her. If I could read it for you. You write that Vera sheltered Jews in World War II, lived in primitive New Guinea, was removed from Bondi Beach for wearing a bikini. The end of her life was hard to watch, and she said, "This is just the way it goes." But the person that she truly was had been dead for many years at that point. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I'll try to do it without getting upset. I'm not the only one that watches their loved ones tragically go on a decline. typically the last 10 years of life are not something we'd wish on our enemies, let alone our loved ones. And I saw that with Vera, that she was vivacious. You can see that in these pictures that are shown behind us, she was so full of life. I had such a great time. Mentally, you know, I was 6 to 10 years old during the glory days with her, and she was also mentally 6 to 10. She was a child herself. It turns out my father, her son, was taken away from her because she had my father when she was 15 years old. So I was really her firstborn that she could raise. And we had a great time. She would drive down the road in the car dancing to music. You know, no seatbelts in those days. And so I learned to love life the way she did. But then to see the last 10 years of her life, she fell on a little ripple in her carpet in her apartment, broke her hip, and was never the same. And this is often what happens to older people, is something really small, like, oh, you trip or you don't hang onto the handrail, that does them in. And it was really tragic to watch someone who was so full of life, who I admired, ended up going on that downhill. And this is everybody's experience, typically. Someone knows someone they love who goes through that suffering, that pain, and there's nothing yet we can do about it.
Mm. Well, I want to actually, there's so much that you're saying right now, Dr. Sinclair, that I want to pursue, but I'm going to hold it to the end here because I want to give the science its adequate due here. We have an illustration, another one, I should say, from Catherine Delphia. Am I saying her name correctly?
Yes.
Delphia. That addresses what we do know right now about the science of aging. So can you walk us through this a little bit? Give us the brief synopsis of what it is we know about why the human body ages.
Yeah, so the field of aging has gone through many transformations. When I started, I came to MIT in Boston in 1995, and the dogma was, take some antioxidants and you'll be good. That's no longer the case. We've moved on. And in the mid-1990s to late 1990s at MIT, we and others around the world discovered genes that control aging. You can tweak one gene in an animal, a worm or a mouse or a fly, and now we know in humans, one change can make a big difference. And so that was a revelation as well. And then in the early 2000s, when I started my lab at Harvard, we and others again discovered that the environment, how the organisms live or how we live, turns on those genes that controls aging. And that was really important. But the problem was we were all fighting as scientists. My gene's more important than your gene. David, you work on the sirtuins. They suck. You should work on mTOR. And then, no, really, it's AMP kinase that's important. And, you know, scientists always want to rush to, not always, but often want to be the center of attention. But what was really important in the early 2000s was a couple of papers that were written to unify the field. And they said, all right, everybody's right. There are 8 causes of aging, and these genes work on many of these. And so let's calm down, let's come together. And so there was a chart that was drawn. It was a pie chart where everybody's favorite theory of aging was put in there equally. And it was happy times. But of course, they're not going to be equal. So some of the things that are on that pie chart are loss of stem cells, loss of nutrient sensing, so high blood sugar, for example, senescence, so zombie cells that accumulate, DNA damage is a traditional one. And in there is epigenetics, which we'll definitely get into, which is what I work on. But these, what are called hallmarks of aging, was a unified theory of why we age. But to me, it wasn't satisfying because I knew we're not aging because of a pie chart. We're aging because there's probably something that's happening to cause all of those things to happen. And I've been looking for that ever since.
Okay, so then tell me more about the epigenetics portion of this, your area of focus.
Yeah, it's been an evolution, but it really started in 1995 when I got to MIT. The lab of Leonard Guarenti, which is still over here in Boston, discovered that there are genes that control aging in yeast. And there was one called SIR2 that gave rise to a whole field now. And I arrived just as they discovered a yeast mutant that lived longer, and they didn't understand why. But it turns out this SIR gene, SIR number 2, it's an acronym for Silent Information Regulator number 2. And what's important about that name is the word information. And really what SIR2 does is it controls whether a gene is silent, switched off, or in its absence, turned on. And in yeast, as the yeast get older, the inability to control the pattern of which genes are on and off is a hallmark of yeast aging, leads to them getting old. And from that discovery led to what I've called the information theory of aging. And that's the idea that it's not the loss of proteins or defects in the cell membrane. These are all known to happen. But what's really going on is that cells lose their ability to control which genes should be switched on and off. Now, when we're embryos and we're young, when we're young, we are very pristine. Cells know how to be cells. Skin cells have the same DNA as a brain cell and a liver cell, and what makes them different is which genes are switched on and off, and we have about 20,000 of those. And these SIR genes that we found in yeast control that pattern. And the idea of the information theory of aging is that that pattern gets disrupted by insults to the cell, such as broken chromosomes, which we have now shown drives this process. And one way to think of it, the analogy is like a compact disc. And for the young people listening and watching, these were really awesome little plastic discs you could put 10 songs on. They were really exciting. But the analogy with aging is that the music is still on the CD, but the scratches are making it hard to read the music. So in biology, what this means is that the DNA with the genes is still intact, but the body can't read it. And that's called the epigenome. The readers of the DNA are the epigenome versus the genome, which is the DNA. And what that actually means is, now when I look at an older person, they might be frail, gray hair, they can't see very well. I'm pretty sure that the instructions to be young are still in that person. The cells in that person just don't know how to read the DNA correctly, which has led us to the idea that we should be able to reset the body in the same way we would reinstall software on an old computer and get the body to work like it was young again.
So then what would be the mechanisms, theoretically, to do that reset or that sort of software update?
Right, or polish off the scratches,
yeah,
if you're still in the 1980s. Well, we didn't know if it was true that the information, the epigenetic information, not the genetic, was still intact. There was no precedent for that existence. We'd learned in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, that you could reset the age of a cell back to 0. Shinya Yamanaka won the Nobel Prize for that, and 2016. But what wasn't clear to anybody was whether you could partially reset a cell from 70 years old back to 25 without going all the way to 0, which you don't want to do. You do not want to be age 0. You will be the world's biggest tumor. So we had this idea that maybe the cell has a memory of being young. There's some information in there that we don't know about. And if we turn on embryonic genes, it's just some of them, and we in our paper that we published in 2020, we used 3 genes. Short, the acronym is O, S, and K. We put OSK into cells, and we found that they did go back, not to 0, but they stopped at about 75% age reversal, and those cells could now have the same function as they did when they were young, and they stayed young. It wasn't just, oh, we had to keep these genes on. It was a reset, and the cells became young and functioned young. And then we used that technology. We tested it on the eye of a mouse. We let mice get old, or we gave them glaucoma, which is a very common age-related disease. And we put in these 3 genes for a couple of months, these 3 embryonic genes that are normally not on in mammals. And guess what happened? They went back in age from an old mouse, which is 2 years, back to a much younger age. And their blindness was cured. And the cells at the back of the eye, the nerve cells, became young for the first time. And it was a permanent reset. And now we actually know that you can keep resetting. So I see a future where we can reset parts of the body, maybe the whole body. We take a medicine, we go back 10 years, and the doctor says, well, come back in another 10 years and we'll do it again.
I think we have an illustration of the mouse experiment that you were talking about just now. And so this is demonstrating or what you were discussing about the reset in the eyes.
Yeah, exactly. This is actually a different experiment that was the first one that we did, but it's very similar. In this case, we had a damaged optic nerve in the mouse, and only very young mice can repair their vision if you damage the optic nerve. Similar to if you break your spine, your spinal cord, you're not going to walk again yet. And we reversed the age of the eye of these mice, and the nerves grew back to the brain, all the way back, and that's never happened before. And so that was the first indication that we could truly restore the ability to heal that's only present in very young individuals. And we measured the age of those cells, and they were young. We have a clock, and we can measure everybody's age now pretty easily for just a few dollars. And those mice, they became younger. And the other thing that's shown in this diagram that's interesting is that there are enzymes that control that clock that we measure. There are chemicals on the DNA that we can read that tell us how old the cell is biologically. And those enzymes, when we got rid of them, they're called TETs, then the mice did not get their vision back. So we needed that system to reset the clock to be able to get vision back. So just the analogy, how important is this? Well, it's as if we had a clock on the wall, and normally if you turn the hands back of a clock, nothing happens. Time doesn't change. But in this experiment, time changed when we reversed the clock, which was really quite a discovery.
The clock, the Horvath clock, is that right?
Yeah, so Steve Horvath gets to name it. He was one of the first scientists. And so Steve discovered that these chemicals on the genome some of them change predictably over time. And he used machine learning to find out which of those sites. So there are millions of these, what are called DNA methylations, or these are chemicals that accumulate on DNA. And a few hundred of those are very predictive of your biological age, and also can predict when you're going to die. So I could take your DNA, a cheek swab, and tell you roughly, if you don't change your life, when you're going to die, and sometimes even what you're going to die of. So this clock has revolutionized aging research, because before all we could do was look at somebody or look at a mouse and say, oh yeah, it looks kind of young, looks kind of old. But now we can very accurately tell you how old it is.
So bear with me for a moment. A couple summers ago I went to Bryce Canyon National Park, and they have a grove of bristlecone pine there, right? A species that's also known as the Methuselah tree, because they live for thousands of years. And the oldest one in this particular little grove was 1,900 years old. But it was like a baby, essentially, right? And I was thinking, in nature, species like that, organisms like that are exceedingly rare, as far as I can tell. If I'm wrong, please correct me. There's like one species of shark whose name I forget.
Greenland.
The Greenland shark that can live for like half a millennia, something like that?
Right. Yeah.
Or more?
Yeah.
Yeah. But there aren't, I mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but there aren't that many. So I'm wondering if aging in and of itself, if the theory is that there's something fundamentally, if aging is a sign of a biological failure, one would presume that with evolution, biological failures would be evolved out. So why don't we have more species that live for extraordinarily long periods of time?
Oh, there's a very simple answer. We only live as long as we need to ensure the species survival. Evolution doesn't care about us as individuals, unfortunately. And if species are preyed upon, like a mouse or an insect, it will breed rapidly and die young, because they put all their energy into breeding. Species that are at the top of the food chain can afford to grow slowly, reproduce slowly, and live long, and put effort into building a robust body. And, you know, we've been at the top of the food chain for not that long, so we're still evolving longer lifespans. Give us another 6 million years, we'll definitely live longer, but we don't have time for that. We need to re-engineer ourselves somehow. But there are species, like you say, that they are relatively rare, but there are quite a lot, hundreds of species that live longer than us. A lot of reptiles, birds even, definitely whales, who, by the way, whales are very similar to us, very, very genetically similar. So, you know, it's not just a tree. We don't have to become trees to live a long time. We just need to find what are the few gene changes in whales that give them the long life. And a whale is full of cells. They don't get cancer for sometimes hundreds of years. There are tricks to this. When often I'm asked, well, maybe we humans are at our limit. 122 is the longest, at least ostensibly, the longest lived human that's recorded. They say, well, that's it. That's all we can do. And my answer to that is, well, we're just getting started. There are lots of species that can live 200, 300 years that are not that different from us. Some live thousands. So there is no law of biology that says we must age. There isn't. Anyone who says we have to grow old doesn't know what they're talking about. There are ways of preserving the body. We see it in the natural world, and we just need to learn how do they do it. And one of the interesting things is if you look at species that live a long time, like whales and these sharks and bristlecone pines, their epigenome, the structures that control the DNA, have a lot more stable epigenome. Their information on how to control the genes switches are very stable, which fits with the information theory of aging. So if we can find ways to control our cells' aging process and be able to maintain that youthful pattern of which genes are on and off, like a whale in a tree, we should be able to live hundreds of years, if not thousands.
But you said that species tend to live on average as long as is needed to reproduce. But what you're positing in the future is human beings living much, 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 much longer than needed to reproduce. So you actually are really pushing against the evolutionary requirement for the lifespan of the human organism.
Fantastic. Why not? Everything else about human
No, I just want to be. I want to be clear on that, because this isn't just like we want to improve people. It's not just that. It's something else. You really are pushing against what you're saying is the evolutionary rule for every other species ever.
Right, but what else?
Yeah.
You know, we've been doing that for thousands of years as a species. What about this room is natural? The air isn't natural. The temperature isn't natural. Clothes are not natural. Speaking into a microphone is definitely not natural. We are an unnatural species, is what we do. So controlling aging is what we do. I would argue that controlling aging is more natural than not controlling it. It surprises me that we as a species have ignored it for so long. If an alien came down and looked at us, they'd say, okay, we're pretty impressed with E equals MC squared and pi to a billion decimal places, but you're missing the most important problem that you face on the planet, and that is you'll get sick. At 70 years old, you're getting sick. That's craziness. We solved aging a millennia ago. What are you doing? Because I just hear a lot of terms that maybe in my mind they're becoming conflated, and you can help me parse them a little. Because, from the moment, one could say from the moment the sperm meets the egg, the aging process has essentially begun. It does begin at conception. We can measure that now.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So by that definition, it's not aging per se that you are trying to do something about, because obviously we need to be born, we need to grow, we need to mature. It's old age and the ravages of old age that you're concerned with.
I'm concerned about aging even in teenagers. We are aging at every stage of our life. Every day how we live matters and accumulates. So if you are in college and you don't take care of your body, that will show up decades later as sickness and old age. There is no escaping that. It's not that you can be really bad and then at age 80 start living well. It's cumulative. And that clock is ticking every day. And so with that knowledge, a lot of young people in their 20s are paying attention to this kind of research, knowing that they need to start early.
Okay, so I guess I'm just confused, though, because is that simply trying to live a more healthful life, or is it, you said that you're concerned about aging in teenagers?
I'm Teenagers are aging. We're all aging. Yeah. Even babies are aging. And the way we raise our children, even in the mother's womb, is ticking that Horvath clock forward, which will cause issues later in life. And so the teenagers, even though they're still developing and getting older, although they look like they're still functioning very well, there are changes to that clock that will affect them later in life. Now, I'm not saying that the kind of things that we do as midlife adults should be done by teenagers. Of course, absolutely not. But I do think that things like obesity and the lack of exercise, just to name two things that teenagers suffer from due to modern society, will cause problems in their health many decades later.
Sorry, I'm just going to push on this a little because it's not that I'm confused. I think there's a gap in my understanding, because, you know, there's been a conception for a long time that the disease, you said this earlier, like the diseases of cancer, heart disease, etc. These are obviously things that we don't want to get, right? And we are spending trillions of dollars to cure, to stave off, to treat. I don't know. Sometimes I look at, especially things like cancer, as in some people the sort of inevitable endpoint of life, right? Because if it has to do with, you know, cellular reproduction, right? That you have to die of something, and a lot of people are going to die of cancer. So I guess what I'm saying is, people, please forgive me about this because it's going to sound cruel, but my mother has, she's got peritoneal cancer. And in total transparency, my father died in October, right? So you have to die of something. And I guess what I'm curious about is, when you push your vision to its farthest extreme, are you saying that you feel like people should not die ever? Or that all these diseases that we're trying to fight should be completely eradicated for what? So that we live forever?
No, absolutely not. I'm not saying we should live forever. I am saying that we have a chance to postpone illness and suffering by tackling what's causing illness and suffering, which is aging. For too long, we've been focused on the end products of aging: cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's. These are 80 to 90% caused by the aging process. So we're really sticking Band-Aids at the end of life on these problems when we're missing the main point that's driving these. Even cancer, young people tend not to get cancer because their bodies are killing cancer cells in their body every day. So if you could take an 80-year-old and make the person 20, then they probably wouldn't get cancer either. You'd have a very strong immune system. Same for heart disease, same for Alzheimer's. We're now reversing aging in mice, in the brain, and their dementia goes away. So I believe that the best way to prevent and also to treat diseases of aging and even damage, like those damaged eyeballs in the mice, is to keep cells young so that they know how to function optimally and take care of us. And when we do that, I think that those diseases that cause suffering late in life, in billions of people, will go away because the body will be young and can fight those diseases.
So what would people die of?
Well, they'll probably still die from the same diseases, but much later and quicker. The longer somebody lives, the quicker they die, with less suffering and the less burden on the economy. That is a fact. And that's what I'm hoping for everybody.
Yeah, but what I'm curious is the longer they live, the quicker they die. I mean, the flip side of that is, especially here in the U.S. healthcare system, but 50% of our healthcare dollars goes to taking care of people in the last year of their lives. So whether they die quickly or not, we're still spending a vast sum of money in that last slice, right? I mean,
that is true. And but what also we should appreciate is somebody who gets sick at age 50 or 60 and then spends 10, 20 years being taken care of. And there are a lot of people like that as well. And I don't think that is necessary. Actually, with technology that's available now, not to everybody, but will be, the scans and the DNA tests, cancer is largely preventable. At least a lot of it can be detected decades before it actually shows up and we get sick. Same with heart disease, very good medicines. Not so much the brain, but we're working on that. There is a future where, even without the age reversal technology, we will be able to prevent the major killers for a long while, long time beyond what we currently do. The way medicine's practiced now, I think, is very medieval. We see a doctor maybe once a year. We go in, they say, how you feeling? Feeling okay? Did you get some sleep? You're getting exercise? That's how it's been done for hundreds of years. What we now need to do is to be able to monitor the body, not once a year, but every second. Yeah. And there are ways to do that. I wear monitors sometimes that measure my body every thousandth of a second and can predict if I'm going to have a heart attack in the future, if I have cancer, and these things are coming. And those technologies, combined with the aging research that we and others are doing, will guarantee for most people an extra decade or two.
Can you talk more about that? Because there is a whole culture, right, of people who are like just constantly biomonitoring themselves, and in fact, it's growing rapidly. We are all carrying devices in our pockets or handbags right now that can do a lot of this. You don't even have to like physically attach it to your body, but it wasn't that long. You'd been talking about this for quite some time. It wasn't that long ago where people kind of looked at you askance about it.
That's true. Yeah, in my book, I talk about having a glucose monitor, which in those days, it was only just pre-COVID. It was weird to have a monitor on yourself unless you had type 2 diabetes or type 1. Now there's a whole trend where people want to know what's going on in their bodies. And the reason for wanting to do that is I make the case that we know more about how our cars are functioning than we know about our bodies. We have a dashboard, there's computers that monitor things all the time, but we fly blind with our bodies. Why is that? We should know how things are going, not just to alert us if we're going to get sick or if there's something we need to see a doctor for, but to know if changes in our lifestyle are working. Everybody's different. I'm often asked, what should I do? And there are some general rules, but we're all very different. We're different genders, different DNA, different epigenomes. We also have different microbiomes, and we also are tolerant of different lifestyles. I don't like exercise. Some people love it. So we're all different. And if you don't monitor yourself in some way, you have no idea if what you're doing is working.
You know, my brother lives in Palo Alto, and he in fact was talking to me about many friends he has that wears the constant glucose monitoring. And there's a whole sort of like biohacking world out there. Maybe I'm just influenced a little bit by the conversations I've had with my brother, but the whole idea that like microsecond to microsecond we can optimize, that's the language of Silicon Valley, right? Optimizing the machine of the body in order to produce the most perfect result, being whatever you want it to be. For those of us who don't live in that world where we're constantly thinking about it, can't that also produce some anxiety a little, right? Because like, you know, I would say that part of what I think is one of the beauties of the human body is that like we're this wonderful homeostatic machines, right? Where like we go through highs and lows of whatever system you want, but overall we kind of attain some kind of balance. I mean, how healthy is it to monitor yourself every second or microsecond of the day and night?
Yeah. Well, I'm not looking at the data all the time,
Okay.
but the computer that gets the data is, and that's what we want. We want AI systems, or at least a nurse or some other practitioner who can monitor hundreds, if not thousands, of people's readouts. And I've seen this. These devices exist. You stick them on. There are screens, and there are hundreds of people. And if there's an alert that somebody has an arrhythmia or is developing an infection, these things pick these things up. They can listen to you. They can tell if you're getting depressed. They can tell if you have early Parkinson's. The screen lights up an orange alert and shows which tissue might be the kidneys. Alert, alert, alert. And so I'm not monitoring it, but I feel comfortable that somebody's paying attention. And if I get cancer or can have a heart attack, I'd rather somebody know about it that can help me adjust. But it can be habit producing. I think it can be a bit of a hobby to monitor yourself. I'm guilty of that. But there's something in between for the average person where flying blind, medieval style is really not going to ensure a healthy, long life. And then there's me who's sciencing the heck out of myself. There's something in between where you can forget about it for months and it's in the background of your life. But why do that? It's not just about the future of life. I'm not doing this actually to live longer. Anyone who's seen me drive my car knows that to be true. I'm really just very curious about where can we be as a species in the future and trying to get that future to be earlier so billions of people can live better. And the living better is very important. If we optimize our bodies for glucose levels, just that, we will have a better day. I learned by monitoring my glucose that I was eating too often. I was getting highs and lows. And these lows are when you get hangry and you have this brain fog, and then you feel like you need a snack, and then you eat a snack and you spike your sugar up again. And this roller coaster through the day is really not pleasant. Most people live like that. They're hungry, they eat, they're hungry, they eat. I now have been able to figure out how my body responds, and I don't feel hungry for most of the day, and then I have a really big dinner, and I can concentrate much better than thinking about food all the time.
I want you to know that this is exactly the opposite of what Dan Buettner told us last week.
Yeah, I'm happy to debate Dan.
Because he talked about front-loading your calorie consumption in the day, right? Having bigger meals in the morning and in the midday, and not eating as much in the evening. And also, I think many doctors would say that rather than having a big meal at the end of the day, it actually is better to have smaller meals, but healthful meals, right? Like maybe what... I'm not going to hold myself up as a paragon of healthy eating. I'm going to be honest, because sometimes when I have a snack, I know my glucose levels are shooting up because I'm having a unhealthy snack. But what you're saying though is actually seems a little contrary to what a lot of the medical advice that people are getting.
Yeah, I agree. I think the idea that we should be nibbling on food the whole day is wrong for longevity. If your goal is to never be hungry, then that's fine. But my goal, and I hope many of you, is that you can spend your 80s and 90s playing tennis or hiking, whatever you want to do. If that's your goal, eating 3 full meals a day with snacks is not going to get you there, most likely. The science says, and I'm always based on science, not on what I want. I would love to eat 3 meals a day. But the science says that in animals and increasingly in human studies, having a window of eating is better. It doesn't have to be at night. I just like to eat at night. I don't feel hungry in the morning. But some people like morning, some people like night. But it's that gap of about 18 hours where the body isn't in a fed state, that the body goes into this fasted state that turns on these longevity genes to protect us. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be draconian about it. You're allowed to have a little bit of food. You know, I nibble on chocolate and nuts, and I'm not always without food. But try to put your meals into a smaller amount of time per day, and that, I think, is the best thing we know about scientifically.
No, the clarification is important. So you're talking about a window and also caloric restriction, right?
Well, not so much, actually.
No?
It's when you eat, not so much how much.
Not how much?
Yeah, there was a really good experiment by Rafael De Cabo at NIH, and he gave mice 3 different diets, lots of fat and carbs and protein, and he was thinking he'd figure out what is the best combination of all those things. And it turns out it didn't matter what the mice ate, it was when they ate. And if he crammed the period when he gave them the food into an hour per day, they lived 30% longer, no matter what they were eating. And to me, that convinced me that we should focus more on when we eat.
Yeah.
But what you eat is also very important, of course, and that combination, I think, is the key.
You wanted to debate Dan Buettner. Okay, that's interesting. We should have done that for the next time. For the record, we tried. Steven, our producer, tried to make that happen. I'm sorry you couldn't make it happen.
I will say that what Dan says about the types of food to eat and the blue zone,
the plant-based foods,
is completely congruent with what my research says.
Okay, what would you debate him on though, or what does he say that you find debatable?
Well, we have a lot more in common than we have apart. I think we could debate whether it's more fun to eat in the morning or night. I think you'd find it a pretty boring argument because we're both in sync on being plant-based, eating plants that are full of what are called polyphenols and plant molecules that turn on the body's defenses. So yeah, I don't think it's worth us debating though. No.
Okay.
I
think it's definitely worth it. But a couple other things that you have talked about for many years, which are becoming more commonplace. So we talked about biomonitoring, essentially, the sort of restricting or finding that window of time to eat. I want to call it fasting. Is that just different than the window of time that you were just talking about?
It's also known as fasting.
Okay. Well, but I'm finding in this conversation getting clear definitions of the ideas that we're talking about is quite important. Cold therapy, meaning?
While you can expose your skin to brief bouts of very cold temperature, 4 degrees Celsius, cold water bath with ice in it, people typically do for 3 minutes or so. What about it?
Is there evidence that it has a positive effect on lifespan?
Not in humans. In animals, if you chill them like mice, they will live longer. Somebody did a study and found out the hard way that if you put them individually, they don't live as long as if... no, they live longer as individuals than with someone that keeps them warm. Okay. So, but in humans, not well known. But what is known about humans is that we have, surprisingly, we have what's called brown fat, which was thought to only exist in newborns. So newborns don't shiver, they have brown fat, and that generates the heat. And it was thought that it was just babies that have that. But we have brown fat. It's found largely on our backs. And when we're cold, when we expose our skin to cold, it revs up that fat and can actually turn white fat into beige fat, which is brownish. And that's very healthy fat. That's the kind of fat that you want. It's highly metabolic, and it seems to secrete these factors that circulate through our bodies that improves metabolism.
So how many of the things or the lifestyle changes that your research seems to indicate might increase longevity, how many of those things do you practice in your life?
Most of them.
Such as?
Well, so I try to eat really well. I was and still am inspired by my partner, who's a chef and a nutritionist, Serena Poon. And so about 12 months ago, maybe 15, she came into my kitchen and threw out most of the food. And we started from scratch. And I used to be on a Mediterranean diet with a focus on red wine and cheese. I thought that would be very healthy. Turns out Serena says that's not true. And it actually turns out to be true, because after I changed my diet to be plant-focused and eating a lot of fresh food and limiting the dairy and cutting out alcohol, my blood biomarkers that indicate my health and age have improved dramatically.
You know, so Dr. Sinclair, I have to say, in reading, looking at your book and reading what I could about your research that's been published, et cetera, there are many people who say that the science that you're doing at the bench is phenomenal, right? It's really pushing the bounds of what we know and understand about the human body. Some of those folks, who I will note wouldn't give their names, have also been quoted in articles about you as they wish you would just stick to the science and not talk about aging or longevity in the way that you do. Saying that we could live past 150. Even tonight you said even it could be longer than that. Saying that we can basically stop aging. What's your response to that?
I think everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and the facts speak for themselves, and I stick to the facts, though I think I should be able to project, in my opinion, what the future looks like. And I also, I like to communicate. I think that our research mostly is paid by taxpayers, and taxpayers have a right to know what we're doing, and also have someone who is in the field to interpret what the field is doing, because most people don't have access to the world's scientific literature. Each paper costs them $40. That's crazy. And then even if they read the paper, it's very hard to understand, because scientists like to use jargon intentionally to obscure things. And it's not right. And so I think that anyone who criticizes me is welcome to that opinion, but I disagree. I think more scientists should be out there talking about their research and trying to explain it in a way that is not only factual and understandable, but also inspirational to get the next generation of scientists to get excited too.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on the importance of inspirational and accurate scientific communication to the public, without a doubt. But some of the concerns that I understand that people have about your interactions with the public, I'll just give you an example. You know this one very well, that in, what was it, in 2006, right? I'm going to give the background to folks, and then I just would love to hear you tell us sort of where we are with this controversy, I guess. That in 2006, you had this groundbreaking research on resveratrol, that I believe is a molecule found in red wine, and did a lot of interviews because, of course, it was fascinating science, and it captured the interest of the general public, including an interview on 60 Minutes where you said that we could expect a pill in 5 years' time that would essentially, be a resveratrol pill. And you also talked to another reporter who said that resveratrol was as close to a miraculous molecule as you could find. But a few years later, other scientists and 2 pharma companies couldn't replicate your results. But then there was another paper that was published in 2013 that verified your results. So I'm just wondering, has that been resolved yet about whether or not resveratrol was the miracle molecule that you said it would be?
Yeah, it turns out science is difficult, making drugs is difficult. And so while I was saying, if all goes well, we'll have a drug in 5 years, I was overly optimistic. I didn't realize how difficult it is to make a drug. I did, though, say there's no guarantee, and it came up against a number of headwinds, one of which was this debate that came up in the pharma world. I was trapped between 2 pharmaceutical companies. At the time, it was GSK, who had purchased our lab's intellectual property, and then Pfizer, who was challenging that. And it's not that much fun being sandwiched between 2 of the largest companies in the world debating your work. But what ended up happening was the Pfizer scientists who said that the theory and the mechanism was wrong, actually, it turns out it was a good thing, because we were forced to go back to the lab and hunker down and test, were we right or were we not? And it was about how the molecule actually works on the enzyme to the atomic level. So we're talking about real details here. And we did the work. And it was 3 years later, we published a paper in Science, 2013, showing evidence that we were right, and it's since been validated. So the controversy over that setback has been okay. So, we've shown that the original discovery was true, and that Pfizer was wrong. So that's all good. But unfortunately, along the way, that controversy led to doubts about the drugs. And even though we had positive data in a phase 2 study in psoriasis, the skin condition, with molecules that were like resveratrol, even better, 1,000 times more potent, the program was abandoned because of the politics that happened. So unfortunately, that died on the vine, but there are lots of other companies that I've been involved with and started that are keeping that flame well and truly alive.
So to clarify, politics can actually undermine research for sure. But it was your lab that was able to you went back and looked at it and verified the results again at the atomic level in that 2013 paper you're talking about, right? Did I hear that correctly?
That was right, yeah.
Has any other lab thereafter been able to do that?
What are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that I just want to know.
Yeah, it's been well and truly validated by others that have done crystal structures, and it's all good. And we have a paper that we're working on now where we've changed a mouse at the atomic level so that they don't respond to the red wine molecule just by making that one amino acid change in the target enzyme. And they don't live longer, they don't run further on a treadmill, and that'll be the punctuation mark on that story of my career.
We're running out of time here, so I'm going to move to some audience questions here because we've got several good ones. Someone wants to know, is immortality biologically possible?
Yeah, I think we're only constrained by our imagination. You said that aging is inevitable. The last line of my book is, nothing is inevitable, even aging. And so I believe there is nothing that stops us from being long-lived. I'm not going to say immortal because that's really quite an extreme. But there is something in between where we can live over 100 and still have a vibrant life and be productive members of society. That is definitely within reach, perhaps even within our lifetimes.
Yeah. Someone else wants to know, how do you suggest we can keep people from misusing this advancement in science and technology? And I'll add a little coda to that. What can we do to prevent these advancements from just further exacerbating inequalities that we already have. Because I feel like oftentimes this kind of cutting edge science in its first iterations really goes to the benefit of a small few.
Well, the good news is that the kind of changes that we know can help with longevity and health actually save money. You know, eating quality vegetables and less often, or at least in a window, that's an easy change to make for most of us. Not everyone has access to really healthy food, but most of us do. Exercise, that's relatively free. So these little changes are available. Now, if you want to talk about gene therapy, yeah, these technologies do start out expensive, in the same way that to fly in the first aeroplanes was expensive, and prices have come down a little bit. But all technologies, think about how much it cost to have a flat screen TV 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. This is the normal course of human advancement, and it's okay initially that the prices are high as long as you can rapidly get them down. And my goal in developing drugs is to get the price down as fast as possible. So one of the companies that I co-founded that's here called Metro Biotech is making a drug that really shouldn't cost that much. Like a drug called metformin, which is a potential anti-aging longevity drug, it should cost only $1 per day, if that, to produce. So I'm hoping that once drugs are made, and to be cheaply made, and even eventually will, of course, go off patent, they will be as cheap as aspirin and available to everybody on the planet.
Mm. There are already 8 billion humans on the planet. If let's say we do achieve a future in the near future where the human lifespan is 150, if not more years, I can't say that I know how that would impact population growth rates, but do you think that even like our economies could support that?
We have to do something about aging. The economies cannot afford not to tackle aging. Yeah. We are now in a world where population is declining across a lot of the world. There are a few hotspots of population growth, but we're going to top out at 10 billion people and start to decline. Already, we're in a really bad place. In the US, we're already declining in fertility. Places like Japan, Italy, China, they're going to face an economic crisis within about a decade if they don't do something about it. And Elon Musk has talked about this. So I won't belabor that point. But what's really often misunderstood is that by allowing people to live healthier, longer lives, it's a huge saving for the economy. I was fortunate to team up with a couple of economists in London, and we calculated that just extending healthy lifespan by a year in the US would save $86 trillion in the long run. And if you save lives for 10 years, it's $365 trillion. These are big numbers. These are dollars that could be put towards improving education and tackling climate change.
Yeah. You know, I have to say, I deeply appreciate the specificity with which you said healthy lifespans, right? Because it's not just living longer. What good does it do us if we live longer, but we're still experiencing many years of ill health? But I'm out of time here. I have one last question for you, though. Near the beginning of our conversation, you said something which has really stuck with me. You said that aging is the worst thing that could happen to us. And I'm still also thinking about the deep feeling that you have about having lost your grandmother, right? I mean, like, people we love, when we lose them, it stays with us. But all in all, in reading about your research and reading your book and reading how you approach your life's work, there's something of the Peter Pan about you. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean that, like, there's a dream that you have. And how do you respond to that?
I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah. No, not with the dream, but it's almost like it's taking you. You're imagining a world which I do have to say is both exciting and I'm not actually sure I want to be a part of.
Well, no one's going to force you to be part of it, but I guarantee when you start to feel the effects of old age, you are going to call me. We often forget that the person 20, 30 years from now is us, right? We think of that as someone else. That's old me. Who cares? But it is us. You know, I'm now 53, and I'm still the same person I was when I was 20. And I wish I could tell my 20-year-old self to eat better and exercise more. And that's going to happen to all of us. All of us will die, unless one of my students has a real breakthrough. But most likely we're all going to die, and it's not going to be pleasant. We have to admit that dying is not pleasant. I've seen now 2 people die. My mother died really not a very pleasant way in front of the family. And I was thinking, why doesn't anyone tell you about this? Why do we not talk about what it's like to die? And if we don't fight against something like that, what are we fighting for, really?
I disagree. No, I do. And again, this is not, I'm not taking issue with your science. There's something very Western about hearing someone say dying is not pleasant, because there are other cultures and traditions in humanity that see dying as yet another phase of life. And for people, I would say dying is not pleasant in American hospitals, for sure. But that doesn't have to be how we die.
Well, you've had illness.
And also dying, for those who are left behind, it is not pleasant. The tragedy of the loss is not pleasant. But we don't necessarily know for those people who had the kind of death that they want, if that wasn't pleasant for them.
Well, it definitely wasn't pleasant for my mother, who suffocated to death in front of us. Mm-hmm. Now, if I could have granted my mother an extra 20 years of life, healthy, even an extra year of life, I would have done so. And you've had sickness and illness and death in your family. What would you have done to make that less painful, or even have an extra year or 2 with your loved one?
No, you know what? I'm pushing you, so I will engage with you on this question, because it's only fair that you asked me. My father, so my mother has peritoneal cancer. She's 77. She was very, very healthy until this summer, was diagnosed with the cancer and was actually doing fine until she had surgery. She had surgery. I would say it's the hospital system that was the problem, not necessarily her cancer. Anyway, she was in the ICU for several weeks. She's actually doing much, much better now. My father, who was extremely healthy, had high blood pressure, so not in perfect health, but had high blood pressure, almost 80. The stress of watching his wife of 52 years suffer the way she did in the ICU, just 2 days before she was released from the hospital, my father was in my mother's hospital room, and he had a heart attack and died. And he died within 12 hours. I mean, he was actually at the hospital, so they came to him within 1 minute, went to the ER. He had surgery. They put 3 stents in. They still couldn't support his blood pressure. Because we knew what his wishes were, he did not wish to have prolonged life support, so we had to make the decision we did. But I give that as background because you asked a question. You asked me a question. What would I want for my father? Because he's the one who passed away. The way he died is exactly how he would have wanted to die, because it was quick. To your point, he didn't suffer for a long time. I, being the person, one of the people left behind, I just want him to be alive longer, right? Like, I'd love him to be alive. But I actually think that those are 2 different things.
What would he have wanted if you said, I could give you something to be with us another 20 years of healthy life? What would he have said?
Well, of course, he would have said yes. Yeah.
So if I had a medicine that you could give to your father and it would reverse his heart disease, by the way, I should have said I'm very sorry that
that's
you've
okay.
experienced that.
Don't worry, it's fine.
It's terrible.
He's with me.
Yeah, I'm sure. So then the question to you is, would you deny your father that?
Oh well, no. I'm not in the business of saying that people should or, shouldn't, because he like you said, I should make my decisions. He should make his. I'm not sure. Knowing him, I'm not sure he would have wanted to, though. So Well, I can only guess now because he's not here.
Here's what I've noticed about being in this business for a while, is that a lot of people I talk to say, I don't want to grow old, so shoot me when I'm 80. There's a doctor who even says that, prominent doctor. My father's now 83, and I think he would disagree with that sentiment. And he has no aches, pains, diseases. He doesn't even need glasses for driving at night in a car. And he's been doing the kind of things that I talk about. Now, we don't know if that's the reason he's living longer and being healthy. We do know that most of the men his age are already in the ground. He's a beacon of hope for all of us, that we can adjust our lives to be able to thrive in our 80s and beyond. And I know that he is grateful to have stuck around even beyond how long my mother lasted. And he's getting to see his grandkids now go to college, and maybe he will see his great-grandkids as well. And that's the life that I think most people should at least have the choice to have. I think that you don't have to opt in, but the way life is right now, where we can get sick in our 50s like my mother and suffer for 20 years, that's not a life well lived. My grandmother also was sick, for 10 years. I look forward to a time when we can choose when we want to die and how we want to die, and it hopefully will be as quick and painless for everybody as possible. And I think that tackling aging is the best way to get us into that future, rather than addressing the symptoms of aging, which is really just putting Band-Aids on a solution and really causing long-term suffering for many people.
Well, Dr. Sinclair, I really want to give you my deepest thanks for sharing your research with us, and for going there with me tonight. Thank you so very much for being here with me. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all, by the way, for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Meghna. Thank you, Dr. David Sinclair, and thank you all for coming out. Thank you to our virtual audiences. Also, thanks to our partners at Brookline Booksmith. You can find copies of David's book, Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to, out in the lobby. And if David still has some time, he'll be signing some copies for you. Now, the announcement of the winner of the Christmas Carol tickets. Congrats to Gina Cronin. There you go. Just meet Anna at the front desk, and she'll get you set up. If you didn't win, tickets are still on sale. Experience Charles Dickens' classic read by some of your favorite hosts here at the station, including Meghna Chakrabarti. And all proceeds support Rosie's Place. That's on December 20th. To support this good cause and enjoy a holiday classic, just head to WBUR.org/events. Once again, David Sinclair. Thank you.